At 15 years old, in the middle of a pounding storm, my father looked me straight in the eyes and said in a voice colder than the rain, "You're nothing but a burden. I don't want to raise you anymore." Then a torn suitcase stuffed carelessly with clothes was thrown against my chest. The front door slammed shut, leaving me abandoned in the dark street. If this moment shocks you, share your feelings with me. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and how this beginning made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next, because I promise what happened after was even more painful and harder to believe. I stood frozen on that suburban Boston street, the cold rain seeping into my bones, clutching the suitcase like the last proof that I still existed. Across the road, Mrs. Edith, our neighbor, quietly pulled back her curtain. Her eyes lingered on me for a second. Then the fabric dropped shut. No words, no hand reached out. In that instant, I understood I hadn't just been abandoned. I had been erased from their lives. I started walking. The sidewalk glistened under the yellow streetlights, reflecting my small, trembling shadow. The handle of the suitcase dug into my palm. My shoes squished with water, every step pulling me deeper into despair. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a puff of white breath in the freezing air. The city went on, cars passing windows, glowing laughter spilling from warm homes. And me soaked, invisible, forgotten. That night was only the beginning. I slept under awnings, curled up at bus stops, sometimes sneaking into churches if their doors were unlocked. Hunger clawed at me, but the shame of begging cut deeper. I swore to myself, don't beg, don't cry. The only thing I had left was a shred of pride thinner than the wet shirt clinging to my skin. It's strange how quickly a child can change in a single night. Yesterday, I was hunched over a math book trying to memorize formulas. Today, I was calculating which street corner I could sleep on without being chased away. My equations were no longer about solving problems on paper, but about surviving another day. And no one, not my mother with her pearls, not my father with his lectures, ever looked back to see what they had thrown away. I thought that night in the rain was the bottom, but I was wrong. The bottom kept dropping lower every day, pulling me deeper. I slept wherever shadows would hide me, under bridges that smelled of rust and river water, beneath stairwells, sticky with beer bottles, sometimes on church pews when the doors were left unlocked. Hunger became a constant hum in my body, a second heartbeat that never let me rest. Some nights I pressed my stomach flat against the pavement just to fool myself into feeling less empty. I scavenged behind diners, waiting until the cook tossed out the garbage bags. That's how I learned to swallow my pride. I ripped open black plastic, found half a sandwich, cold fries, stuck together, sometimes even a piece of pie someone hadn't finished. I ate like a thief, crouched low, my ears straining for footsteps. I told myself it was just food, but deep down I knew I was feeding on shame as much as scraps. Work came in bits and pieces. A gas station owner let me pump fuel for a few dollars. At a greasy spoon on the corner, I carried plates heavier than my arms wanted to hold washing dishes until my fingers pruned and bled. The pay was small, but the hours meant I could sit in the warmth a little longer before being pushed back out into the cold. Not everyone was cruel, but cruelty has a way of finding the weak. One night behind a bakery, I bent over a bag of stale bread when a group of older boys stepped out of the shadows. Their leader sneered, "This is our spot. You don't eat here." Before I could answer, fists rained down. My cheek scraped against the brick wall. My ribs screamed with every kick. When they left laughing, I lay there in the filth, clutching a crust of bread like it was treasure. That was my education. Pain taught me faster than any textbook. But I wasn't completely alone. There was Tommy. He was 16, a year older than me, with the same hollow eyes of someone who had nowhere to go. We met near the bus depot, sharing a pack of crackers someone had tossed our way. He had a crooked grin, the kind that tried to pretend life was just a bad joke. Together we watched each other's backs. When the bullies came, we ran faster side by side. When food was scarce, we split every bite in half. For the first time since that slammed door, I felt like someone saw me. Then, one winter night, Tommy didn't make it. He tried to jump a moving freight train chasing a rumor of warmer weather down south. I found his name in the paper days later listed as unidentified male, approximately 16. No family claimed him. No flowers, no prayers. Just silence. That silence cut deeper than hunger. I swore then I wouldn't disappear like him. I would survive not just to spite the world, but because someone had to carry the memory of boys like Tommy, boys who mattered even when nobody cared. After Tommy was gone, I thought I'd never feel seen again. The streets swallowed me whole, and I became another shadow drifting between alleys and bus stops. But then there was him, my grandfather, Alonso Rivera. He wasn't the kind of man you hugged easily. A former Navy man, his spine straight as a rifle, his voice roughened by years of command. Most people found him intimidating, even cold. But I noticed something in the way his eyes lingered when he saw me. He didn't pity me. He assessed me like a soldier checking if a recruit could handle the weight of a pack. At first it was just glimpses. I'd be bussing tables in a diner and catch sight of him across the street standing with his hands behind his back, watching. Sometimes he slipped a folded bill into my palm without a word. Other times, a short command, eat, or keep moving. His care was never soft, but it was steady. And when you've been invisible for so long, steadiness feels like salvation. One winter night, the city froze over. My breath crystallized in front of me, my hands numb inside torn gloves. I had ducked under the fire escape behind an old laundromat, trying to block the wind with my body when his shadow fell across mine. Alonso stood there, wrapped in his heavy wool coat, his cap pulled low. He didn't waste time asking how I was. He already knew. He knelt his knees cracking as he lowered himself beside me and set a small wooden chest between us. The wood was worn smooth, the brass lock catching the dim glow of the streetlight. He pushed it toward me with both hands, his jaw tight. "Guard this," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Don't open it until the day is right. When that day comes, you'll understand everything." I stared at it, baffled. My teeth chattered as I asked, "Why me?" His eyes narrowed, studying me the way only he could. "Because you're the only one I trust." The words hit harder than any fist had. My parents had branded me useless, a burden. But here from a man who had seen war, who had built and lost and built again, came trust. It was more valuable than food, more binding than shelter. I clutched that chest to my chest, as though it held not just secrets, but the very proof of my worth. From that night on, wherever I went, shelters, basements, borrowed rooms, that wooden chest followed. I carried it like an anchor, and in a world that wanted me erased, it anchored me to a promise. For years, I didn't know what was inside. Some nights, temptation whispered to pry it open. Hunger begged me to pawn it. But every time I remembered his voice, "Guard this." And so I did. That chest wasn't just wood and brass. It was a lifeline, the one thing reminding me that someone somewhere still believed I was more than nothing. That wooden chest never left my side, and in a strange way it grew heavier each year, not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. It forced me forward. If my grandfather had trusted me with something worth guarding, then I couldn't give up. I had to become someone strong enough to deserve that trust. So I worked. God, I worked until my body screamed. By day, I pumped gas, the smell of oil sinking into my skin. At night, I carried plates in a diner, grease splattering my arms, the weight of trays bowing my back. And after closing, I scrubbed dishes until the water turned black and my hands were raw. Then, when the city was asleep, I dragged myself to the community college library. I read under flickering fluorescent lights, my eyes burning, words blurring together, but I refused to quit. While other kids my age worried about dates or football games, I was calculating how many hours of work it would take to pay for one more class. By 19, I scraped enough together to rent a room above a hardware store. The walls were thin, the pipes groaned, and rats sometimes scurried across the floorboards. But it was mine. For the first time, when I turned the key in the door, no one could throw me out. I set the wooden chest on the small dresser, its brass lock catching the weak glow of the lamp, and I swore to myself I would build a life around it. That's when I found something I didn't expect. Or maybe I should say, someone. Her name was Sarah. She worked nights as a nurse trainee, often walking past the hardware store when her shift ended. One evening, she saw me crouched in the alley fixing the busted engine of my car. My hands were black with grease, my shirt soaked through with sweat. Most people would have passed by pretending I wasn't there. She didn't. She stopped, tilted her head, and asked, "Need a hand?" I almost laughed. Nobody had ever offered me a hand that wasn't clenched in a fist. But she meant it. Over time, Sarah became the first person outside of my grandfather who looked at me with something I hadn't known in years respect. She didn't see a boy from the streets or a dropout washing dishes. She saw someone fighting to stand tall, and somehow that made me want to stand taller. With her, I learned I didn't have to be defined by the night I was thrown out. The bruises, the hunger, the cold, they had carved something in me, but they weren't the whole story. I wasn't just the boy who carried scraps in a torn suitcase. I was a man learning to carry myself. And for the first time in my life, I began to believe that maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe I was becoming. For a while, with Sarah by my side, and that wooden chest always within reach, I thought maybe the past had loosened its grip on me. But time has a way of circling back, dragging you into rooms you swore you'd never enter again. 12 years after that night under the laundromat fire escape, the call came. My grandfather, Alonzo Rivera, was gone. The funeral was held in New York at the Rivera estate. A mansion with marble columns and polished floors, the kind of place that smelled of money and power. I hadn't stepped foot there since before I was thrown out, and walking up those steps felt like stepping into enemy territory. My heart pounded not from grief alone, but from the weight of what I knew waited inside them. Victor and Martha arrived in a black Mercedes, stepping out draped in expensive fabric, their faces arranged into masks of sorrow so practiced it almost looked convincing. Almost. I knew better. The woman who had once crossed her arms while I was shoved out into the rain had not suddenly discovered love. The man who had called me dead weight hadn't grown softer with age. They came for one reason only, to claim what they believed belonged to them. And then there was Lucue. My little sister, no longer little. She had grown into a woman with tired eyes, a teacher's hands, and a quiet strength I hadn't expected. When our eyes met across the hall, she froze. Her lips parted, but before she could step forward, Martha's hand clamped down on her arm, steering her away. That look, half longing, half fear, stabbed deeper than the coldest night I'd ever known. In the far corner stood Raphael, my Uncle Victor's younger brother. Slick suit, gold cufflinks, the smirk of a man already counting money he didn't yet own. Raphael had always been the kind of man who thrived in shadows, closing deals that left others bleeding. His eyes flicked over me like I was a nuisance, a problem to be dealt with. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and tension. A string quartet played in the background, soft enough to be ignored, but sharp enough to remind us this was a performance. Guests whispered some stealing glances at me, others pretending I wasn't there at all. I was the ghost in the family portrait, the stain they couldn't scrub away. I approached my grandfather's casket. Dark wood polished until it shone. His photograph rested above it, stern, proud, unyielding. My throat tightened. I laid my hand on the casket and whispered so quietly no one else could hear. Thank you for never looking away. But behind me, footsteps, shuffled voices rose, and I felt the shift ripple through the crowd. Everyone knew what was coming next. It wasn't the prayers or the flowers or the final goodbyes. It was the reading of the will. The air turned electric. The masks slipped. Every eye sharpened. Every breath held. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was war. The music faded. The whispers died down. And then Mr. Donovan, my grandfather's attorney, stepped forward. He was tall, silver-haired, with a voice that carried authority. In his hands, a thick leather folder. The room fell into a heavy silence as he cleared his throat. As executor of Alonzo Rivera's estate, he began, I am here to read his final will. The words rolled out like thunder. Everyone straightened in their chairs. Martha dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief she didn't need. Victor leaned forward, jaw tight, like a man about to collect what he believed was rightfully his. Raphael smirked, already picturing himself counting the spoils. Mr. Donovan went through the formalities, first small bequests to charities, gifts to loyal employees. But then he paused, adjusted his glasses, and said the words that cracked the room open. As for the estate, valued at $55 million, in businesses, properties, and accounts, it shall be left entirely to one person. The heir will be the one who kept my secret safe. Gasps rippled across the hall. Heads turned, whispers rose like a storm. My father shot up, his voice booming. This is absurd. That boy hasn't been part of this family for years. He's nothing. He doesn't deserve a cent. My mother's pearls trembled against her throat as she hissed, Victor, stop. But her eyes betrayed the same hunger. Raphael slammed his fist against the arm of his chair, shouting, You're telling me a street rat gets what I've worked for? Mr. Donovan raised a hand, calm against the chaos. The will is clear. The one entrusted with the chest is the heir. The room went silent, every eye cutting toward me. My pulse thundered. Slowly, I reached under my chair and pulled out the same wooden chest I had carried for over a decade. The brass lock gleamed under the chandelier, and a hush swept through the crowd. With trembling hands, I set it on the table. The key, kept safe by Mr. Donovan, clicked into place. The lock released with a sound that seemed louder than any shout. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, and a sealed envelope stamped with red wax. The room inhaled as one. I opened the envelope. The letter was written in my grandfather's firm hand. To my family, I leave these words as truth. In war, I learned the measure of a man is not in what he claims, but in what he protects. I once saved the lives of men who trusted me. I carried their secrets as I carried my own. But one of you betrayed that trust. Victor, my son, you stole from the company, from your own blood. For that you inherit nothing. The only one I trust with my legacy is Daniel the grandson who guarded my secret when the rest of you sought only your own gain. The words cut sharper than any blade. Victor staggered back, his face pale, his mouth open in silent fury. Martha clutched his arm, trembling. Raphael cursed under his breath, his greed exposed. And me, I stood there, the chest before me, the weight of his words heavy on my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the boy they threw away. I was the man my grandfather had chosen. The last words of my grandfather's letter still echoed in the hall when the eruption came. Raphael shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the marble floor like a gunshot. His face flushed red, his voice rising. "This is fraud! A trick. I'll drag this into court, and you'll regret ever setting foot in this house, boy." The guests gasped, some leaning back, others craning forward, eager for blood. My mother Martha seized the moment. She jabbed a finger at me, her pearls rattling against her chest. "Look at him. He's nothing but a liar, a leech who fed off pity. Alonzo was manipulated, tricked by this stray dog we once took in." Her words cut, but not as deeply as they once might have. Years ago, they would have broken me. But now, standing with the chest in front of me and the journal in my hands, I felt something steadier. I raised my chin. Before I could speak, a sound broke through the shouting, a sob. "Lucia." My sister stood trembling near the back. Her hands clenched, tears spilling down her face. All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear enough to slice through the noise. "Stop it! Just stop! You all turned your backs on him, but he never turned his back on Grandpa. He's the only one who never betrayed him." The room froze. Victor's jaw tightened, rage burning in his eyes as he hissed Lucia, "Be quiet." But she didn't. She took another step, her voice growing stronger. "I was there that night. I saw him carrying scraps, fighting to survive while you told me he was weak, gone nothing. But he's stronger than all of us. Grandpa saw it, and now I see it too." For the first time in years, someone in that room other than me dared to speak the truth aloud. And it didn't just silence my parents, it silenced everyone. The weight of her words pressed down like a gavel. Mr. Donovan opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with my grandfather's handwriting. He read passages describing loyalty sacrifice and betrayal. Each word peeled back the polished lies my family wore like fine clothes. With every line, the truth struck harder. My grandfather had seen through them all. And then, like a final twist of fate, Sarah stepped forward. She had slipped into the hall quietly, unnoticed until now. Dressed simply, her nurse's badge still clipped to her uniform, she carried no airs, no jewels, just conviction. She looked directly at the lawyer, then at the crowd. "I saw Alonso meet with Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "More than once, he told me, that boy is the only one who understands me, the only one I trust with my truth." Gasps filled the air louder than before. Martha staggered back. Victor's face turned to stone. Raphael cursed under his breath. But me, I stood rooted chest tight as the pieces of my life clicked into place. For so long I had been silent, carrying a secret in the dark. Now the truth was out in the open, undeniable, and it wasn't just me saying it anymore. It was my sister. It was Sarah. It was my grandfather through every word of his journal. For the first time, I wasn't standing alone. The hall was silent, heavy with the weight of truths no one could deny. Mr. Donovan closed the journal, his voice final. "The will stands. The estate, the companies, the accounts, all of it now belongs to Daniel Reyes, as per Alonso Rivera's last wish." The words rang out like a bell. My father's face drained of color, his mouth tightening into a hard line. Martha clutched his arm, whispering frantic protests that sounded more like the hiss of a cornered animal. They tried to stare me down as if sheer force of will could undo what had been written, but the verdict was already carved in stone. They had nothing. When the ceremony ended, Victor and Martha stormed toward the exit. Their designer shoes clicked against the marble floor, a retreat dressed as dignity, but soaked in humiliation. Guests turned their heads, some out of pity, others out of quiet satisfaction. Watching them walk away, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. They had thrown me out once. Now life had thrown them out in return. Raphael lingered, his expression unreadable. He stepped close enough for me to hear him whisper, "Enjoy it while you can, nephew. Fortunes shift, power shifts, and I don't lose forever." His smile was thin, sharp as a blade before he turned and disappeared into the crowd. His words hung in the air, a shadow of another battle waiting on the horizon. But not that day. That day belonged to something else. When the guests thinned out, I found Lucia waiting near the casket, her shoulders trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said I should have reached out sooner. I let them silence me. "I'm sorry." I placed a hand on her shoulder, my voice soft. "You were a child. None of this was your fault. What matters is that you're here now." She nodded her hand, gripping mine tightly. In that moment, the years of distance, the nights I had stared up at the ceiling, wondering if she remembered me, they all melted away. For the first time since that night in the rain, I felt I had a family again. In the weeks that followed, I signed papers, met with lawyers, and assumed control of what my grandfather had built. The numbers were staggering, but the money wasn't what stayed with me. What stayed was the journal, his words etched in ink, and in my heart, character is revealed not by greed, but by loyalty and sacrifice. Lucia and I began a foundation in his name, the Alonso Rivera Trust, a place for children like Tommy, for kids tossed aside with nothing but scraps and shame. If my grandfather's legacy was fortune, mine would be to turn it into shelter food and second chances. Looking back now, I know this blood is not the proof of family. Loyalty is. Integrity is. Survival forged me, but love, the rare, unyielding kind, redeemed me. I was the boy they cast out. Now I am the man who carries not just his inheritance, but his truth. And that truth is worth more than $55 million.